I had bought it when Miriam and I were first married. It had once been full of life. Children's laughter, the smell of fresh baked goods, the sound of the piano. Now it was silent, broken only by the ticking of the antique wall clock and the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. 4 years. 4 long years since Miriam had been gone. Sometimes I thought she had just gone out into the garden or gone shopping and was about to return. The yellowed photos held moments from our youth. Here was Miriam and I at the prom, here was our wedding, and here was the day Cade was born. My son, the only child we dedicated our entire lives to. The phone rang unexpectedly, snapping me out of my embrace of nostalgia. The number was unknown and I almost decided not to answer it. Lately, I'd been getting a lot of calls with offers of loans, insurance, and other nonsense that could only interest those who were desperately afraid of death. I was not one of them. "Hello," my voice sounded hoarse. I cleared my throat. "Mr. Baxter?" "Errol Baxter?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, that's me. This is Sheila from Dr. Pritchard's waiting room. The doctor asked you to call him back as soon as possible." Something in her tone made me tense. "Was something wrong?" I asked, feeling my heart start to race. "The doctor would like to discuss your test results in person," she said evasively. "When would it be convenient for you to come?" "Tomorrow morning." "That's fine. Then we'll expect you tomorrow at 9 o'clock. I hung up the phone and froze, staring at the picture of Miriam and me standing in front of the Grand Canyon. It was our last trip together before she was diagnosed with cancer. Anxiety clenched my throat. I knew a call from the doctor asking for an emergency appointment was never good news. My gaze fell on the newspaper on the coffee table. On the spread was an article about a new sports car. I allowed myself to take my mind off my troubled thoughts for a moment. Cars had always been my passion. As a boy, I could spend hours looking at magazines with glossy pictures of luxury cars, dreaming of one day driving such a beast. But life turned out differently. A job in a chemistry lab, a mortgage, Cade's education, all of it required financial stability. So I chose practicality over dreams. All my life, I'd driven modest, reliable cars that had served me well for years without hassle or investment. Miriam often teased me about my car dreaminess, as she called it. She used to say I looked like a teenager when I flipped through car magazines and promised that someday we would buy me a sports car. But there were always more important expenses. Cade College, roof repairs, a new heating system, and then it was too late. The sun was slipping toward dusk when I decided to go out on the porch. The neighbor boy, Peter, was riding his bike down the street, and Mrs. Hudson was watering her countless flower beds as always. "Good evening, Errol," she waved her hand affably. "Beautiful weather today, isn't it?" I nodded and smiled. Mrs. Hudson was one of the few people who still dropped in on me after Miriam's death. Sometimes she'd bring home baking, sometimes she'd just drop in for a cup of tea and a chat. She'd been a widow for 15 years and seemed to have learned to live with the emptiness. "Cade hasn't stopped by?" she asked, coming closer. I shook my head. The last time he'd been here was Christmas, almost 5 months ago. Mrs. Hudson pressed her lips together, but didn't say anything. She knew my son's situation, knew that since Miriam's death, our already strained relationship had grown even more strained. Cade had always been an ambitious boy. Even in high school, he had planned his life for years to come. A prestigious university, a law career, a house in an upscale neighborhood, and he achieved everything he wanted. By the time he was 35, he was a successful corporate lawyer, married to the equally ambitious Victoria. Victoria. Even mentally, I said her name with some distaste. Tall, well-groomed, with perfect hair and manicures. She always looked at me like I was some kind of exhibit in a museum. Interesting, but definitely outdated and out of place in their immaculate lives. When Miriam was alive, they still maintained a semblance of a family relationship. They came over for Sunday dinners once a month, called for holidays. Miriam was the glue that held our family together. Without her, everything fell apart. The last serious conversation we had with Cade was at the funeral. He stood beside me, immaculate in his black suit, with a perfectly straight back and dry eyes. "You'll have to decide what to do with the house," he said then. "It's too big for one person. Maybe you should sell it and move to a smaller apartment. Or a nursing home. There are good options with medical care. Miriam wasn't even buried yet, and he was already planning how to get rid of the house where his childhood had been, the house that held all our memories. I'm not going anywhere, I replied then. This is my home, he shrugged. Suit yourself, but think about it. Victoria can help with the sale. She knows a realtor. After that, our contact became infrequent and formal. Short calls on birthdays and Christmas, a couple of visits a year. That's all that remained of our relationship. Sometimes I thought he was waiting for me to die so he could inherit my estate and get rid of my burdensome father. The sun had finally disappeared over the horizon, and there was a chill in the air. I went back into the house and turned on the television, not to watch but to fill the silence. Dinner was simple: reheated soup from yesterday and toast with cheese. Since Miriam's death, I had pretty much stopped cooking. Why try when you eat alone? The night passed restlessly. I tossed and turned, thinking about my upcoming doctor's appointment. By morning I felt wrecked, but I got up anyway, shaved, and put on my best shirt. Miriam always said that you should go to the doctor's office as if you were going to a job interview. Neat and organized. Dr. Pritchard's clinic was downtown in an old brick building. I arrived in my old sedan 15 minutes before the appointment time and sat in the car, gathering my courage. The reception area was nearly empty, just an elderly woman with her knitting and a young mother with her baby. Sheila, the nurse, smiled welcomingly at me. Dr. Pritchard is expecting you, Mr. Baxter. Please come in. Dr. Pritchard has been my doctor for over 20 years. He treated Miriam to the very end, and I trusted him implicitly. He greeted me with a firm handshake and pointed to a chair. Errol, he began without preamble, the results of your tests are in, and I'm afraid the news is not good. I nodded, feeling strangely calm. At my age, bad news from a doctor isn't so frightening anymore. We found a malignant mass in your pancreas, he said, looking me straight in the eye. It's already quite large, and there are signs of metastasis to the liver. I blinked, trying to comprehend what I was hearing. How many? I asked. Dr. Pritchard understood the question without elaboration. With this diagnosis, usually 6 months to a year, maybe more if we start treatment immediately. There are several options. Chemotherapy, possibly surgery. I listened to him, but the words came out like a fog. Cancer, the same enemy that took Miriam. Now he's coming for me. I need to think, I interrupted him, about treatment. Dr. Pritchard nodded. Of course, but don't take too long. Time is of the essence. He handed me a folder with the results and referrals. I mechanically took it. Call me when you're ready to discuss the next steps, he said as he walked me to the door. I walked out of the clinic feeling strangely light. The sky was incredibly blue and the air was fresh. I inhaled deeply, feeling the sun warm my face. Getting into my car, I placed the folder on the seat next to me and just stared at it. Inside was information that was going to turn my life upside down, make me fight, cling to every day. But instead of fear, I felt a strange release. Miriam had struggled for 2 years. 2 years of pain, humiliation, endless hospital corridors and the smell of antiseptic. And still she lost. Did I want to go through the same thing? And for what? For a few more months of living alone in an empty house? I started the car and drove home, thinking about Kaida. Should I have told him? It wouldn't make a difference. He would express formal sympathy, maybe offer help he had no intention of giving, and go back to his life. At home, I put the folder on the study table and walked to the window. Over the years, I had learned to live alone, but I had never stopped feeling Miriam's absence. Now the prospect of seeing her soon seemed almost comforting. I opened the closet where the most precious things were kept and took out a box of old letters. Among them was an envelope with a will made while Miriam was still alive. Everything I owned would go to Kaidu the house, the savings, even the collection of antique clocks I'd spent a lifetime collecting. I always thought it was right to leave everything to my only son. But now looking at those papers, I wondered for the first time if he deserved it. A man who couldn't find time to visit his father even once a month? A man who saw me as a burden and my house as potential real estate for sale? The phone rang again, snapping me out of my musings. This time the number was familiar. Katie. Coincidence? Or did he have some kind of sixth sense for potential changes in the will? Hey, Dad. His voice sounded cheerful, but I could hear the falseness in it. How are you? I'm fine, I answered. What's up? Nothing, just calling to see how you're doing. Victoria and I were thinking maybe we could come over this weekend. It's been a while. I could barely contain my laughter. I haven't seen you in 5 months, and suddenly I miss you. Sure, come, I said. Down, I'll be home on Saturday. Great, I'll see you then. He hung up and I stood there staring at the phone. Something was definitely wrong. Cade never just called, much less offered spontaneous visits. I walked back to my desk and looked at the diagnosis folder again. Maybe Dr. Pritchard had called him? No, that would be a breach of medical ethics. Whatever was behind Cade's sudden interest, I had until Saturday to think about the situation and decide what to do about the diagnosis, the will, and the rest of my life that had suddenly become so finite and certain. I put the folder and the will back in the closet and walked to the window. Outside, life went on as usual. People rushing about their business, children playing, dogs barking. The world didn't stop because of my diagnosis, and that was perhaps the most sobering realization. During the night, I dreamed of Miriam. She was sitting in the garden, wearing her favorite wide-brimmed straw hat, pruning roses. The sun was playing in her gray hair, and she was smiling as she always smiled, softly and with a kind of hidden wisdom. Errol, she called to me, come and see how this beauty has blossomed. I wanted to come, but my legs wouldn't do it. I tried to tell her the diagnosis, but my voice wouldn't come out of my throat. She kept smiling and pruning the roses as if we had an eternity ahead of us. When I woke up, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. It was just starting to get light outside the window. The file with the test results was on the bedside table. I'd moved it from the office before I went to bed, as if it were some kind of jewel that shouldn't be left unattended. Pancreatic cancer, the same thing that took my father. Irony or just genetics? Doesn't matter. The result is the same, an irreversible sentence that can only be delayed for a short while. I got up, brewed some coffee, and returned to the bedroom with a cup. I opened the folder, ran my eyes over the medical terms one more time. Adenocarcinoma, metastasis, prognosis unfavorable. Words that turned my life upside down. What did I feel? Strangely, not fear, more like a kind of detached curiosity, as if this was not happening to me, but to someone else, and I was only an observer. At 73, death no longer seems abstract and distant. It is part of the natural order of things. One thing that was troubling, though, was the pain. I saw my father go. I saw Miriam go. It was not a light dream, but an agony that stretched on for months. That's what I was truly afraid of. After finishing my coffee, I made a decision. No chemotherapy, no surgery. I wasn't going to spend the last months of my life fighting the inevitable. Instead, I was going to live them with dignity and maybe even joy. Miriam would understand me. I glanced at the clock. It was only 6 in the morning, but sleep was no longer coming. Putting on my robe, I went down to my office and sat down at my computer. I opened my bank account and several investment portfolios. All my life I'd been a frugal person. Not stingy, no, just rational. Miriam and I never allowed ourselves excesses, always saving for a rainy day, always thinking about the future. A future that didn't exist for her, and now it wouldn't exist for me. The screen glowed with numbers. Pretty impressive numbers. Besides the house, fully paid off 15 years ago, I had about $1,200,000 in savings and investments. Money I planned to leave to Cade. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, remembering my only son. What kind of kid was he? Serious, determined, sometimes a little too stubborn. He was never satisfied with just good grades. He only wanted excellent grades. Never satisfied with just winning. He needed to be the best. Miriam used to say that he had gotten into me, that my desire for stability and reliability had transformed in him into a hunger for success and recognition. Maybe she was right, but there was something else about Cade, a coldness that I never had. I remembered the day he announced he'd gotten into law school. Miriam and I were so proud, the first in the family to get that level of education. We had a celebratory dinner, invited all our friends, and then Cade said he needed help with his tuition. Sure, I said then, without hesitation. We'll do anything. We sold the stocks we were saving for our old age, took out an additional mortgage on the house. Miriam went back to work, even though she had planned to retire. We had no regrets. It was for our son, for his future. And what did we get in return? Rare visits, formal holiday calls, and a son who looked at our house as real estate waiting to be purchased. Outside the window, the rain began to fall. Small drops drummed on the glass, creating a monotonous, soothing noise. I opened my eyes and looked at the computer screen again. $1,200,000, a sum I never planned on spending. Money for Cade, for his future. What if I'd handled it differently? The thought came out of the blue, but once it was there, it never let go. What if instead of leaving it all to Cade, I spent some of it on myself, on something I'd always dreamed of, but never allowed myself? I opened a new tab and began searching for information on car dealerships in the nearest major cities. The ones that sold not just cars, but dreams. The sports cars I'd been dreaming about since I was a teenager. In an hour, I had already made a list of the models I was interested in. In another hour, I found dealer contacts and asked for information about availability and the possibility of a test drive. Something changed in me during that night and morning. It was as if the shackles that I had put on myself years ago were suddenly falling off. The diagnosis that should have broken me instead set me free. I remembered how Miriam and I had once talked about death. It was shortly after her diagnosis. We were sitting in the garden, drinking wine, and she suddenly said, "You know, Errol, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm only afraid that you'll stop living after me." I didn't know what she meant at the time. How could I stop living? But now, 4 years after her death, I understood. I existed, breathed, ate, slept, but I didn't live. I was a shadow of myself, frozen in time. Perhaps this was her last gift to me. These 6 months or a year I had left. A chance to remember what it felt like to feel alive. The phone rang, snapping me out of my musings. It was Victoria. I suppressed a sigh and answered it. "Hi, Errol, it's Victoria." Her voice sounded sugary sweet. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine," I answered neutrally. "Anything wrong, Sonny?" "Oh, nothing much. Just wanted to confirm our visit this Saturday. Cade said he called you." "Yeah, he did. I'll be home." "Oh, that's great. I was thinking maybe we could do something special. Do you have any preferences?" This was new. In all the years I'd known Victoria, she'd never offered to cook dinner for me. She usually sat with a glass of wine while Miriam tended to the kitchen, and since her death, our rare meals together had usually been in restaurants. "Don't worry," I said. "I'll cook something myself." "Oh, come on, Errol, it's no problem. I've recently mastered a great lasagna recipe. You're gonna love it." Lasagna. My favorite dish, as Miriam knew, but not Victoria. "Okay," I agreed, deciding not to emphasize the oddity. "I'll see you Saturday." "See you Saturday. Take care of yourself, Errol." I hung up the phone and thought, what's going on? First the sudden call from Cade, now Victoria, and her inexplicable concern. Something was definitely wrong. The rest of the day passed in a strange, uplifted mood. I called a car dealership in a neighboring town and made an appointment for the next day. Looked at a few more car models online, then suddenly decided to put the garage in order. If I was going to buy a new car, I needed to make room. The garage was a sort of time capsule. It held things I couldn't bring myself to throw away after Miriam died, but I didn't want to see every day either. Her gardening tools, the boxes of Christmas decorations we always hung together, Cade's old bicycle. I stood in the middle of all this junk and suddenly felt relieved. It was time to let go of the past. I started sorting through the stuff, some into the trash, some set aside for the thrift store. By evening, the garage was almost empty, and it seemed symbolic. I greeted the next morning with an energy unusual for the last few years. I put on my best suit, which I hadn't pulled out since Miriam's funeral, and drove to the car dealership. The dealership was in a modern glass and metal building on the outskirts of Little Rock. Inside, it smelled of new leather and money. A young sales manager who introduced himself as Brad met me at the entrance. "Mr. Baxter, it's a pleasure to meet you." We spoke on the phone. "Were you interested in the Aston Martin model?" I nodded, feeling a little out of place in the midst of all this splendor. There were cars all around, each one costing as much as a small house. "Yes, I'd like to see a DB11. Brad smiled and led me to the back of the showroom, where there was a silver beauty that took my breath away. "Here it is," Brad said proudly. 6.0 tenths of a liter, 12-cylinder engine, 520 horsepower, acceleration to 100 kilometers in 3.6 seconds. I walked around the car admiring every line. It wasn't just a car, it was a work of art. "Would you like to drive it?" Brad offered. I nodded, unable to hide my excitement. Brad opened the door, and I sank into the leather seat. The steering wheel felt alive under my fingers. I closed my eyes and for a moment imagined driving this car down an empty highway with the windows open and the wind playing in my gray hair. "We can arrange a test drive if you want," Brad offered, "but there's some paperwork to fill out." "I'll take it," I said, opening my eyes. Brad blinked. "Right now." "Right now," I confirmed. "What papers do I need to sign?" I spent the next 2 hours going over the paperwork and discussing details. I'd decided to pay the full price outright, without credit, which seemed to surprise and delight Brad. He fussed around me, offering me coffee, showing me additional options, talking about the warranty, and I thought about what Cade would say when he saw this car in my garage. He always criticized even my smallest expenditures, deeming them unwise. "Why do you need a new TV, Dad? Your old one still works. Why change the furniture? This one's still pretty decent." What would he say about a $200,000 car? And then it hit me. That's why Cade suddenly decided to visit me after months of ignoring me. Somehow he knew about my diagnosis. Maybe he knew someone at the hospital, or maybe he just happened to overhear a conversation. And now he wasn't worried about me. He was worried about the inheritance that would sail out of his hands if I started spending money on treatment. That explained both Victoria's sudden concern and the haste of the visit. Their fear was not that I would die, but that I would spend money they already thought was theirs. That thought should have made me angry, but instead I felt a strange satisfaction. If they cared more about the money than they did about me, why not give them a real reason to care? I signed the last document and got the keys to my new car. Brad walked me to the exit where my silver beast was already waiting, gleaming in the sun. "Great choice, Mr. Baxter," he said, shaking my hand. "Good luck on the road." I got behind the wheel and started the engine. It responded with a soft but powerful roar. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive. The drive home was an adventure. I took my time, savoring every minute. The car obeyed the slightest movement of the steering wheel, accelerated with fantastic ease. I even made a detour to take a more scenic road. Back in Siloam Springs, I attracted a lot of attention. Cars like this were a rarity in our small town. People turned around, pointed fingers, and when I parked in front of my house, the neighbor boy, Peter, came running up with burning eyes. "Mr. Baxter, is that your car? It's so cool." I smiled, feeling not just an old neighbor, but someone worthy of admiration for the first time in a long time. "Yes, Peter, it's mine. Can I see it up close?" Sure." We spent half an hour discussing the car's features. I showed him the interior, the engine, told him about the top speed. Peter listened with his mouth open, and I felt young and energetic again. We were joined by Mrs. Hudson, who came out of her house, attracted by the noise. "Errol Baxter, what is this?" she exclaimed, looking at the automobile. "My new car," I answered with some pride. "It must be worth a fortune." "About 200,000, I said carelessly. Mrs. Hudson shrieked and pressed her hand to her breast. "Errol, are you out of your mind? That kind of money." "Why not?" I replied, smiling. "I've been saving for a rainy day all my life. I think it has come." She looked at me carefully, and understanding flashed in her gaze. "Is something wrong?" she asked quietly as Peter stepped back to take pictures of the car from all angles. I shrugged. "Life happened, Edna. Just life." She nodded without insisting on details, for which I was grateful. That evening I sat on the porch sipping whiskey and gazing at my new acquisition, which now held a place of honor in the driveway. My mind was spinning with thoughts of Cade and Victoria's upcoming visit. What would they say when they saw this car? How would they react when they found out I'd spent a significant portion of their inheritance? Strangely, instead of anxiety, I felt an almost childlike anticipation. It was like I was preparing to prank someone for April Fool's Day. I decided not to call them and tell them about the purchase. Let it be a surprise. And then I thought, why stop there? If I have less than a year to live, why not spend those months doing the things I've always dreamed of? Traveling, nice restaurants, maybe even making new acquaintances. Miriam would approve. She always said I was too cautious, too fixated on a future that might never come. She'd laugh at the look on Cade and Victoria's faces when they saw what I'd spent money they already thought was theirs. I finished my whiskey and stood up. The sudden fatigue came in waves, a busy day after all. But it was a pleasant fatigue, not the exhaustion I'd grown accustomed to over the years. Tomorrow I'll start planning a trip. Maybe to the coast, or the mountains, or even abroad. And on Saturday I will meet my son and daughter-in-law, and it will be a very interesting day. Saturday came all too quickly. I spent 2 days getting used to my new car, driving it out to neighboring towns and just enjoying the feeling of speed and freedom. Each trip brought a strange, almost forgotten feeling of joy, as if I were a young man again, without the burden of years and bitter memories. Now the silver Aston Martin stood in my driveway, gleaming in the morning sun. I'd purposely left it out of the garage. I wanted Kate and Victoria to see it as soon as they drove up. I'd prepared a small lunch for them, nothing fancy, just baked chicken and vegetables. Victoria said something about lasagna, but I decided not to count on it. In all the years I'd known her, I couldn't remember her ever cooking anything more complicated than a salad. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the bell rang. Mrs. Hudson stood on the doorstep with a pie in her hands. "Sure, don't run. I thought I'd stop by before I went to my daughter's," she said, handing me the dish. "Apple, your favorite." I gratefully accepted the gift. Mrs. Hudson was a true old-school neighbor, the kind of person who would always come to the rescue and never judge. "Thank you, Edna. Would you like to come in for a cup of coffee?" She shook her head. "I can't. I promised to be at Jenny's by 11. I see your new beauty is still here." She nodded toward the car. "I can't believe you bought such an expensive toy." "It was about time," I shrugged. "I've always wanted one." Mrs. Hudson looked at me carefully. "Kate and Victoria are coming today, right?" "Yeah, they should be here this afternoon." "I can imagine their reaction," she smiled slyly. "Poor Victoria would probably faint." I laughed. "I hope it won't come to that. But yes, I think they'll be surprised." "Okay, I won't keep you. Have a good day, Errol." She left and I went back into the house thinking about my upcoming visit. What did I expect from this meeting? Gloating pleasure at the shock on their faces? Or maybe finally having an open, honest conversation about our relationship? I didn't know the answer. I only knew that something had to change. For too long, we had lived in this strange, insincere reality where my son and daughter-in-law pretended to care about me, and I pretended to believe them. Time stretched slowly. I made dinner, set the table, even pulled out the old collector's wine from the cellar. Not that I was going to have a party, but I wanted it to look normal, a normal family dinner. At 1 o'clock, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Their new BMW, the luxury SUV they'd bought last year, pulled up right behind my Aston Martin. Through the window, I saw Kate get out of the car and froze, staring at the silver vehicle. Victoria, getting out next, was staring at it with her mouth open as well. I took a deep breath and opened the front door. "Kate, Victoria, it's good to see you. Come on in." Cade turned around. There was such a range of emotions on his face that I could barely contain a smile. "Dad," he pointed to the car. "Is that, yours?" "Yeah," I answered nonchalantly. "Do you like it?" "It's—" He hesitated, obviously struggling for words. "Is it an Aston Martin DB11? "Yeah, it's the latest model. It's a nice car." Victoria was finally able to speak. "Errol, how much is this thing?" I shrugged. "About 200,000. That's nothing, right? Let's go inside, dinner's almost ready." I turned and walked into the house, feeling them exchange glances behind me. They followed me into the living room, Victoria not even remembering her promised lasagna. "Dad," Cade began as we settled into the living room. This is pretty sudden. I mean, the car." "Yeah? Well, it makes sense to me. I've always wanted one. But, he hesitated, trying to find the words. "It's very expensive, and not very practical for a man of your—" "An older man." "My age, you mean?" I smiled. "Don't worry, I'm still quite capable of driving. Although I have to admit that I haven't tried 280 kilometers per hour yet." Victoria made a kind of squeeze sound. 280? Aha, her top speed is 320, but I don't think I'll be accelerating that much. Not right away anyway. Cade coughed. Dad, I think that was not a very wise decision. A car this expensive requires special care, insurance, and anyway, why do you need that kind of power? You've always been a practical man. I have been, I agreed. But people change. Now I've decided to live a little for myself. Live for yourself? Victoria interjected with a hint of judgment. Spending a lot of money on meaningless toys? I felt the irritation building up inside me, but I held back. You know, Victoria, it's interesting that you see buying the car I've dreamed of all my life as a pointless waste. But somehow your new diamond necklace, which I noticed at Christmas dinner, doesn't? She blushed and touched her neck, even though she wasn't wearing jewelry today. That's different. Of course it is. It's your money, or rather Cade's money, and it's my money that you're so concerned about for some reason. Cade straightened up, his eyes narrowed. Dad, nobody's talking about your money. We're just worried about you. Impulsive decisions like this are not like you. Not like the old me, I corrected him. Interesting coincidence, don't you think? Victoria hurriedly intervened, obviously trying to smooth over the rising tension. Errol, we've been meaning to come over for a long time. We've just never been able to find the time. And now we've had a little break, so we thought we'd pay you a visit. This has absolutely nothing to do with your shopping. Shopping? I gave her a long look. Victoria had always been a bad liar. Her eyes. Cade tried to keep the conversation light, talking about his work and new clients, but I could see that his mind was on something else. Victoria barely ate, only picking at her plate and occasionally casting concerned glances at me. Finally, when the main course was finished and I had poured the wine into glasses, Cade decided to get down to business. Dad, he began cautiously, Victoria and I wanted to talk to you about the future. Is that so? I took a sip of wine. What kind of future? Yours, of course. We're worried about you. You live alone in this big house, and now this unusual purchase. We thought maybe you should consider moving somewhere where you can be taken care of. I set my glass down. You mean a nursing home? Shush. Not necessarily, Victoria interjected quickly. There are very nice residences for the elderly, like small apartments, but with medical care nearby, very comfortable and safe. And what will happen to my house? They exchanged quick glances. Well, it could be sold, Cade said, to pay for you to live in the residence. And the car? I asked, already knowing the answer. The car? Cade hesitated. Dad, let's be honest. You don't need a car like that. You can sell it too. And the money would go towards my upkeep in the nursing home? I asked sarcastically. A residence for the elderly, Victoria corrected me. And yes, that money will be used to provide for your comfort. I leaned back in my chair and looked at them both. You know what? I'm starting to realize what's going on. You somehow found out that I'd started spending money, and you were afraid there'd be nothing left of your inheritance. Cade went pale. That's not true, Dad. We're just worried about you. We are? Then why weren't you worried 5 months ago? Or a year ago? Why now? I told you, I've had a very stressful job. I interrupted him by raising my hand. Cade, let's be honest, at least for now. You found out I was at the doctor's office, right? Do you know anyone at Dr. Pritchard's clinic? He stopped talking, his face impenetrable. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. Somebody told you I was being examined, and you thought I was going to spend money on expensive treatment. Money that you already thought was yours. Victoria laughed nervously. Errol, this is some kind of misunderstanding. We had no idea you were seeing a doctor. We just... Victoria, I gave her a look that made her stumble. You've never been good at lying. If you want to know the truth, yes, I did see Dr. Pritchard, and yes, I've been diagnosed. Pancreatic cancer, terminal. I have about 6 months to live, a year tops. There was dead silence in the room. Victoria went pale and clutched at her throat, and Cade froze, staring at me wide-eyed. What? He finally squeezed out. Dad, what are you saying? What you're hearing. I have cancer, inoperable, and I've decided not to waste the last months of my life on pointless chemotherapy that will only prolong the agony. But, there must be a cure, Victoria muttered. No, Nothing that makes sense in my case. Is that why you decided to buy this car? Kaid asked, his voice trembling. Exactly. I decided that instead of leaving all the money to you, I'd spend some of it on myself. Something I'd always dreamed of, but never allowed myself to do. Cade turned even paler. But Dad, that money, it could have gone to experimental treatments, to the best doctors. I grinned bitterly. Isn't that what you're worried about, Cade? That I could spend every last dime and you'd have nothing left? No. How can you think that? Very simple. Because you haven't been here in 5 months. Because you didn't even call me on my birthday. Because the first thing you talked about when you saw me after so long was selling my house and car. Victoria suddenly burst into tears. That's not true, Errol. We care about you. It's just that we have our own lives, our own problems. Of course, Victoria. Your problems are more important than a lonely old man who happens to have cancer. But as soon as I spent a little money, you came running. Interesting coincidence, isn't it? Cade slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes bounce. That's enough. You're being unfair, Dad. Yes, we haven't seen much of each other lately. Yes, I've been busy with work. But that doesn't mean I don't care about you, do you? I looked him straight in the eye. Then tell me, what did you do this past weekend? Or the weekend a month ago? What kept you from coming here? He was silent, unable to find an answer. Exactly, I nodded. Nothing, you just didn't want to. I was a burden to you, an old man who only needed a visit every 6 months to clear his conscience. And all would have been fine if I had lived out my days quietly, keeping my inheritance. But I've decided otherwise. It's not family property, Victoria hissed suddenly, her face contorted with anger. You can't just throw money around. I can't? I raised an eyebrow. Interesting. And whose money is it, may I ask? Mine, earned over 40 years of work. My savings, my investments. Since when did it become family property? We're family, she exclaimed. This car belongs to us, too. There was a heavy pause in the room. I looked at Victoria's flushed face, at Cade's pale face, and felt a strange calm. It was as if everything had fallen into place. That's it, I said quietly. You really think you're entitled to my money? Even before I'm dead? Dad, that's not what Victoria meant, Cade began. But I interrupted him. No, that's exactly what she meant. And you know what? Now I know for sure I did the right thing. And the car is just the beginning. I plan on spending a lot more money in the coming months. Travel, entertainment, everything I've been deprived of. Saving for a future that, as it turns out, isn't coming. You can't, Victoria blurted out. Yes, I can, and I will. It's my money, my life, and my right to use it as I see fit. Kaid was suddenly deflated. His shoulders slumped and he covered his face with his hands. You're seriously ill, he muttered, and we're fighting over money. It's not right. I agree, I nodded. It's wrong, but you're the one who started this conversation, not me. I didn't know about the diagnosis, Cade said, looking up at me. I swear, Dad, we really just wanted to visit you. I looked at him for a long moment. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe the coincidence was coincidental. But still, their reaction to the car and the conversation that followed showed the true attitude. Okay, I believe you, I finally said. But that doesn't change the point. You came here and the first thing you started talking about was selling my house and car. About how to dispose of my stuff like I was already dead. We just wanted to make sure you were taken care of, Victoria countered, but without the heat of before. No, Victoria. You wanted to control my money. And now that you know about the diagnosis, that control is even more desirable, isn't it? I mean, there's not much time left. She lowered her eyes, unable to bear my gaze. What are you going to do? Kaid asked after a pause. Live, I answered simply. Live the way I want to live while I can. And you can visit me if you want, or not. That's your choice. But don't expect to get much from the inheritance. I have big plans for that money. Victoria made some kind of squeeze sound, but Cade stopped her with a hand on her shoulder. It's your right, Dad, he said quietly. Your money, your life. I nodded, surprised by this sudden acceptance. Yes, it is mine, and I intend to live the rest of my time as I please. We sat in heavy silence. It was starting to rain outside the window, the drops drumming against the glass, providing a strange, almost soothing background to our tense conversation. "I'm sorry," Cade finally said. "I'm sorry we've had so little contact in recent years." I looked at my son, really looked, maybe for the first time in a long time. New wrinkles were visible on his face, and gray was showing in his hair. He was getting old, my boy, and I had missed most of his adult life. "I'm sorry too," I replied. "But you know, it's not too late to start communicating for real. No falseness, no pretense, just like father and son." Cade nodded, his eyes glittering suspiciously. "I'd like that." "Me too." I turned to Victoria. "And you can be a part of it too if you want. A real family, not just heirs waiting for their share." She pressed her lips together but nodded. "Of course, Errol." I wasn't sure of her sincerity, but I decided to give her a chance. After all, what did I have to lose? "So," I clapped my hands, changing the subject, "who wants to take a ride in my new car?" Kate and Victoria stayed the night. It was their offer, and though part of me wanted to say no, I agreed. After all, for what it's worth, this is my son, the only family I have left. Although after our conversation, the word family took on a bitter flavor. The guest room was always ready to receive, a habit from Miriam's time. She'd never let that room get dusty, even when guest visits became rare. "The towels are in the closet," I said as I escorted them upstairs. "If you need anything, I'll be in my room." Victoria smiled awkwardly. "Thank you, Errol. I'm sorry about what happened at dinner." I nodded, not saying a word. I didn't want to continue this conversation. Everything had already been said, and quite clearly. When I got back to my room, I couldn't sleep for a long time. My mind was reeling with scraps of the conversation, the expressions on their faces when I'd announced the diagnosis. Was Cade really shocked, or was it an act? I wasn't sure I could read my son anymore. For too many years we had lived as strangers. The morning began with the smell of coffee and something roasting. I went down to the kitchen and found Victoria at the stove. She was making French toast, my favorite Sunday dish, which she had no way of knowing. "Good morning, Errol." She smiled so sweetly that my teeth almost ached. "How did you sleep?" "Fine." I walked over to the coffee pot and poured myself a cup. "I didn't know you could make French toast." She blushed a little. "Oh, it's easy. I found the recipe in a cookbook in the cupboard. I hope you don't mind me poking around in there." Miriam's cookbook, with her notes and bookmarks. I felt a pang of irritation, but I held back. Of course not. Cade walked into the kitchen, freshly shaven and wearing a fresh shirt, as if he were going to a business meeting rather than spending Sunday with his father. "Good morning." He walked over and patted me on the shoulder, a gesture we hadn't used in probably 20 years. "How are you feeling today?" "The usual," I replied, sipping my coffee. "Cancer doesn't develop overnight, you know." Victoria let out a nervous chuckle, and Cade wrinkled his nose slightly. "I was just asking, Dad. We're worried." "Of course you're worried." I sat down at the table. "Let's get some breakfast." Victoria fussed around the table, laying out toast, pouring juice, offering jam and butter. This sudden concern seemed contrived and insincere. Yesterday she'd been sitting at this table claiming my car, and today she was playing the model daughter-in-law. "So," Cade began as we started eating, "Victoria and I talked last night about your situation." "My situation," I repeated, grinning. "You mean cancer? You can call things by their proper names." "Yes, about your illness," he corrected himself. "We were thinking, maybe we should consult with other doctors after all. Get a second opinion?" I sighed. "Cade, I've already consulted. Dr. Pritchard wasn't the only one who examined me. The diagnosis has been confirmed by 2 independent specialists." "But maybe there are some experimental treatments?" Victoria intervened. "I've read about new technologies, clinical trials." "And how much would it cost?" I asked bluntly. They exchanged quick glances. "Money isn't a problem," Cade said. "We have savings. We could help." I laughed. "Cade, don't lie, at least now. You're not going to spend your money on my treatment. Your only concern is that I might spend my own money that you've already mentally divided. That's not fair." Victoria set her fork aside. "We are genuinely concerned about your health." "Are you?" I looked at her intently. "Then why haven't you been concerned all these years? Why didn't you visit me, call me, inquire about my health until yesterday? We've been busy, Cade started, but I interrupted him. Everybody's busy, Cade, but people make time for what's really important. He sighed and rubbed his face with his hands, a gesture he'd learned from me as a kid. Okay, Dad, maybe you're right. We could have been more careful, but things are different now. You're sick, and we want to help. Sorry, how? We were thinking, Victoria intervened, maybe you should move in with us. We have a big house, a guest room on the first floor with a private bathroom. You wouldn't have to climb the stairs. Why would I want to move in? I asked, even though I understood their motives. So we can keep an eye on you, Cade answered. When the disease progresses, you'll need help. And you're willing to provide that help? In person? Victoria will change my sheets when I can't get out of bed. Will you help me get to the bathroom? Victoria turned slightly pale and Cade pressed his lips together. Well, it doesn't have to be in person. You could hire a caregiver. That's it, I nodded. A caregiver. And who's going to pay for it? We could. Cade started but stopped himself at my glare. Well, out of your money, of course. It's for you. My funds, which you'll control if I move in with you. Dad, you've got it all wrong. Cade was clearly starting to lose patience. We're just trying to help. When your condition worsens, you won't be able to manage your finances on your own. Someone will have to take over. And that someone, of course, will be you. Who else? I'm your only son. I pushed my plate away and folded my hands on the table. Cade, let's be honest. You're not worried about how I'm going to spend my last months. You're worried that I might spend every last dime. So you want me to move in with you, to control my spending. It's not like that, he exclaimed, but his eyes gave him away. No? Then why don't you move in with me? There's a spare room here too. You could work remotely and Victoria could visit us on weekends. That's not possible, Victoria said quickly. Cade has important meetings at the office. Clients. Exactly, I nodded. Cade's work is more important than taking care of his sick father, which is understandable. So let's not pretend that your offer is motivated by concern for me. There was a heavy pause. Cade stared at his plate, and Victoria fidgeted with her napkin. Okay, Cade finally said. If you don't want to move in with us, why don't we hire a caregiver to come here, to help around the house, with medication, anything you need? I shook my head. As long as I'm able to take care of myself, when that changes, well, we'll decide then. But Dad, you have to think about it beforehand. It's not easy to find a good caregiver. I have insurance that covers hospice care when it becomes necessary. I made the arrangements when Miriam was sick. Hospice? Victoria questioned. But that's for the dying. And I am dying, Victoria, I said gently. In 6 months or a year, I'll be gone. And I want to spend that time as I see fit. In my own house, on my own terms. Sorry. But Dad, Cade began, it's still wiser to... No, I held up my hand to stop him. I've made up my mind. I don't want to discuss it anymore. This is my life and my death, and I'll live it the way I want to. Victoria stood up, collecting the plates. All right, Errol, we respect your decision. I doubted the sincerity of that statement, but I nodded. After breakfast, Cade suggested we go for a walk. It was a clear day and we went out into the garden, which I kept in relative order, though certainly not as immaculate as it had been under Miriam. Beautiful roses, Cade said, pointing to a bush with large red flowers. Mom always loved them, remember? I remember, I smiled, remembering how Miriam used to spend hours in the garden, talking to her roses as if they were children. They were her favorite variety. Mr. Lincoln, if I'm not mistaken. You keep the garden well maintained, Cade said, looking around. Although, those beds look neglected. He pointed to an area where Miriam used to grow vegetables. I don't do vegetables, I shrugged. Too much trouble for a few tomatoes. We reached the bench under the old oak tree and sat down. We were silent for a while, watching the wind play with the leaves. Ottawa, Dad, Cade finally spoke. I understand that you want to remain independent. It's natural, but you must realize that over time, the disease will progress. The pain will get worse. You won't be able to do many things that seem easy now. I know, Cade. I saw your mother leave. Then you must realize that sooner or later, you will need help. I nodded. Sorrow. And when that moment comes, I'll make a decision. But right now, I want to live life to the fullest while I can. And spend money on expensive toys, Cade said. Yeah, that too. It's my money, Cade. I earned it, and I have the right to spend it however I want, even if it means there's nothing left of the inheritance. There it was, finally spoken, the thing he was most concerned about. Even if that's the case, I confirmed. Nakapitom. Though I don't really plan to spend it all, you'll still have the house anyway, and probably some of the savings too. He paused for a moment, obviously considering this information. I don't want you to think I only care about money, he said finally. You're my father, and I love you. The words came out of the blue and I didn't answer right away. When was the last time we said those things to each other? Perhaps when he was a child. I love you too, Kaid, I finally answered. Despite all our differences and estrangement over the last few years, you are my son, my blood, and I wish that in the time we have left, we could regain at least some of what we've lost. He nodded, his eyes glittering suspiciously. I'd like that too. But, I continued, it has to be an honest relationship. No manipulation, no ulterior motives. Just father and son trying to make up for lost time. I agree, he held out his hand and I shook it. Maybe there was sincerity in his words. Maybe the diagnosis had really made him reconsider our relationship. Or maybe it was just another attempt at manipulation. I didn't know for sure, but I decided to give him a chance. When we got back to the house, Victoria had already packed their things. They were getting ready to leave. We have to get back to town, Kate explained. I have an important meeting tomorrow, and Victoria needs to get ready for the presentation of the new projects. Of course, I nodded. I understand. But we'll be calling, Victoria added quickly. And we'll come next weekend, if you don't mind. I'd be happy to, I replied, though I wasn't sure how sincere that sounded. We were standing at the door saying goodbye, when Cade suddenly hugged me, a tight, real hug like I hadn't had in years. Take care of yourself, Dad, he said quietly, and call me if you need anything, any time of day or night. I will. I patted him on the back and pulled away. Victoria hugged me too, though this hug seemed more formal. Bye, Errol. I'll see you soon. I watched as they got into their BMW, turned around and pulled out onto the road. Part of me wanted to believe that something had changed, that these 2 days had really brought us closer together. But the other part remained skeptical. Back at the house, I noticed an envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a bank card and a note from Cade. Just in case, the PIN number is Mom's birthday. There's $20,000 in here. Use it if you need it. Love, Cade. I stared at the card for a long moment, not knowing how to react. Was it a gesture of genuine concern? Or an attempt to pay me off? To make amends? Or maybe a way to control my spending after all? If I used his money, he could keep track of what I spent it on? Either way, I decided to keep the card. Not because I was going to use it, but as a reminder that maybe all was not lost in our relationship. That evening, the phone rang. It was Katie. Hey, Dad. His voice sounded tired. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I'm fine, I answered. Did you have a good trip? Yeah, no problem. Listen, about the map I left behind. I hope you didn't take it the wrong way. I was just trying to help. I understand, I said after a pause. Thank you. And, I've arranged a consultation with Dr. Richardson. He's an oncologist who specializes in pancreatic cancer. One of the best in the country. He can see you next Thursday. I sighed. Katie, I told you I wasn't going to. I know. You don't want to get treatment, and I respect your decision, but maybe we should at least hear all the options. For my peace of mind, if not yours. I remained silent, pondering his words. Perhaps it made sense. Not to start treatment, but to make sure I made the right decision. Okay, I said finally. I'll go to counseling, but I can't promise I'll change my mind. That's all I'm asking, I could hear the relief in his voice. I can go with you if you want. We'll see, I said evasively. Let's talk about it closer to the date. After the conversation, I sat in the chair for a long time, thinking. Something had changed over the weekend. Cade really seemed to start caring, or at least tried to do so. Perhaps the shock of my diagnosis had really made him reevaluate our relationship. But there was something about it that kept me on edge. It seemed too sudden a turn, too convenient. After so many years of indifference, suddenly he cared so much. I remembered the way Victoria had looked at my car with ill-concealed greed, how they'd immediately talked about selling the house, about moving, about controlling my finances. No, I couldn't fully trust this sudden concern. There might have been sincerity in it, but I had no doubt that the main motive was still money. And I was determined that whatever happened next, I would maintain my independence. I would live my life the way I wanted and make my own decisions until the last day. No one, not even my own son, would tell me how to spend the rest of my time and how to dispose of my money. I picked up the phone and dialed Dr. Pritchard's number. Hello, this is Errol Baxter. I'd like to discuss home palliative care options. And yes, I've made the decision to withdraw from active treatment. It's been 2 weeks since Kite and Victoria found out about my diagnosis. 2 weeks of sudden calls, texts, and questions about my well-being. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. On Thursday, as promised, I met with Dr. Richardson, the oncologist Cade had found. The doctor was a competent specialist and an honest man. He confirmed the diagnosis and prognosis. But unlike my son, he didn't try to pressure me with treatment. Chemotherapy can prolong life for a few months, he said as he reviewed my tests. But the quality of life will be significantly reduced. Given the stage of the disease, I understand your decision. Cade, who was present at the meeting, looked disappointed. He seemed to be hoping the doctor would start convincing me that I needed aggressive treatment. But Richardson was the kind of doctor who respects a patient's right to choose. There is also the option of palliative chemotherapy, the doctor added. Less intensive, aimed more at controlling symptoms than fighting the tumor. But that's your decision too. I thanked him for his honesty and told him I would think about it. In reality, I had already made up my mind, but I didn't want to argue with Cade right there in the doctor's office. On the drive home, my son was silent. Finally, when we were almost to my house, he spoke up. You're not even considering treatment, are you? I sighed. Cade, you heard the doctor. Treatment will give me, at best, a few more months. Months that I'll spend agonizing with nausea, weakness, and pain. I saw it with your mother. I don't want to go through that. He was silent for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. I just don't want to lose you, he said finally, and his voice shook. That surprised me. Maybe there was something sincere in his concern after all. I know, son, I said softly, but none of us are forever, and I'd rather spend the rest of my time enjoying life than fighting for a few more weeks of existence. That was the end of the conversation. Cade dropped me off at my house and drove away, promising to call. Over the next few days, I felt an unprecedented surge of energy. It was as if accepting the inevitable had released some internal reserves. I started making a list of things I wanted to do while I still could. Nothing particularly extreme. I was a realist after all and understood my limitations. But there were places I wanted to see and experiences I wanted to have. On Monday, I decided to go on a little road trip, not too far, to the Ozark Mountains, about a 3-hour drive from Siloam Springs. Miriam and I used to go there a lot when we were young. There was a small family-run lakeside hotel where we stayed. I wasn't sure if it still existed, but I wanted to check it out. It was a clear morning. I loaded a small bag of stuff into the Aston Martin and drove out around 8 o'clock. The road was almost empty, and I enjoyed driving. The car responded to the slightest movement of the steering wheel as if it were an extension of my body. For the first time in many years, I felt a real thrill from a simple drive. About halfway there, I stopped at a roadside cafe. It was a typical American establishment. Red leather couches, black and white tiles on the floor, the smell of coffee and pastries. I sat down at the counter and ordered a coffee and a slice of apple pie. Nice ride, the barista told me, nodding toward the window where my silver beauty was parked. Thanks, I smiled, feeling strangely proud. I just bought it. Aston Martin DB11, right? He whistled. Powerful thing. What is it, 500 horses? 520? I was pleasantly surprised by his knowledge. Do you know anything about automobiles? A little, he shrugged. I've been interested since I was a kid. I never thought I'd see such a car in the middle of nowhere. We got to talking. His name was Justin, he was 25, and he was working at a coffee shop to save for college. He dreamed of becoming an automotive engineer, but his family couldn't afford to pay for his education. Right now, I'm saving for my first semester, he said, About another year, and maybe I'll get in. I remembered how I had dreamed of higher education myself when I was his age, but couldn't afford it. Only hard work and a little bit of luck allowed me to become a chemical engineer with no formal education in the field. Never put off your dreams, I told him. Time passes faster than it seems. When I left him a tip of $100. Not that it helped much with paying for college, but maybe it was a sign to keep dreaming. By lunchtime, I made it to the Ozarks. The town hadn't changed much over the years. Same stores, same old buildings, same laid-back atmosphere. I drove through the center of town and headed toward the lake. To my surprise and delight, the Pine Beach Hotel still existed. The same wooden two-story house, the same cozy guest houses scattered around the grounds. I parked the car and entered the lobby. There was an elderly woman sitting at the front desk, engrossed in a book. When the door opened, she looked up. "Welcome to the Pine Coast," she began her standard greeting, but suddenly stopped talking, staring at me. Errol? Errol Baxter? I was stunned. Who was this woman, and how did she know my name? "Yes," I answered cautiously. "And you are?" She laughed. "Of course you wouldn't recognize me. It's been almost 40 years. I'm Laurel Parker, used to be Laurel Thompson. My husband and I bought this hotel from my parents, and then it hit me. Laurel was the daughter of the previous owners of the hotel. When Miriam and I came here, Laurel was a young girl helping her parents. Laurel! I was genuinely excited. "I can't believe it. How did you recognize me?" "You haven't changed much," she smiled. "There's a little more gray, of course, but your eyes are the same. Where's Miriam?" My face must have changed because she knew right away. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't realize." "It's okay," I tried to smile. "It was 4 years ago. Cancer." Laurel came out from behind the counter and hugged me tightly. It was a simple, sincere gesture that somehow touched me more than all the formal condolences I'd received. "Stay with us," she said. "I've got a vacant cabin, the one you and Miriam always rented. Number 5. I was touched that she remembered even that. Number 5 was exactly as I remembered it, cozy with a spacious veranda overlooking the lake. The furniture had been updated, but the general atmosphere was still the same. I stood in the middle of the room, and memories came flooding back to me. How Miriam and I had sat on the veranda watching the sunset. How we had cooked a simple dinner in the small kitchen. How we had laughed and loved each other. I stepped out onto the veranda and inhaled deeply. The air was filled with the smells of pine trees in the lake. In the distance, a fishing boat slowly glided across the water. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. In the evening, Laurel invited me to have dinner with her and her husband, Frank. They lived in a small house near the main hotel building. Frank turned out to be a pleasant man, a little younger than me. He greeted me warmly, even though we had never met before. Over dinner, we talked about the past, about how the city had changed, about our lives. I told them about Cada, about my work, about the years after Miriam and I stopped coming to the Ozarks. "Why did you come back now?" Laurel asked. After all these years, I wondered. Should I have told them the truth? But something in their open, friendly faces made me trust them. "I have cancer," I said simply. "Pancreatic. Maybe 6 months left." I decided to spend that time doing something I'd always wanted to do, but had put off until later. They didn't offer formal condolences or ask awkward questions. Instead, Frank poured me more wine. "Then it's all the more good that you're here," he said. "You have to savor every moment." That simple human response meant more to me than all the words of comfort I'd heard from Kate and Victoria. And oddly enough, he's now showing more interest in my life than he had in all the years before. "It happens a lot," Frank said thoughtfully. "People don't appreciate what they have until they start losing it. Or until they're afraid they're going to lose their inheritance," I added bitterly. Laurel covered my hand with hers. "Don't judge him too harshly. Sometimes it takes people a while to realize what's really important." I nodded. People I barely knew showed more warmth and understanding than my own son. Perhaps that was my fault. I'd always kept my distance, always been reserved in showing affection. Maybe Cade just didn't know how to be closer to me. I got home in the late afternoon. There were 3 messages on my answering machine from Cade and 2 from Victoria. They sounded concerned. I'd left without telling them, and I hadn't returned their calls. I decided to call back in the morning. Right now, I wanted to maintain the sense of calm and peace I'd brought back from the Ozarks. The next few weeks passed at a strange pace. I felt pretty good. The pain hadn't started yet, just a little weakness and weight loss that I noticed when my pants got too loose. Every day I tried to do something that brought me joy. Riding my Aston Martin, reading books I'd long put off, watching old movies I'd loved when I was younger. Cade called every day, sometimes even twice. Victoria called too, talking about some trivia, like she was trying to mend a relationship. They came every weekend, bringing food, books, sometimes just sitting with me in the garden. On the face of it, they really cared about me. But there was something insincere in that care, some tension, especially when it came to money or my plans. "Dad, are you sure you should be traveling so much?" Cade asked when I talked about my trip to the Ozarks and my plans to visit the Grand Canyon. "It's exhausting, and the cost of gas." "Cade," I interrupted him, "I'm quite able to afford gasoline for travel, and the doctor said that activity is only good for me as long as I'm feeling okay." He reluctantly agreed, but I could see that it wasn't my health or the cost of gasoline that bothered him, but the fact that I kept spending money. One Saturday, Cade brought his cousin, Pierce, whom I hadn't seen in about 10 years. Pierce was an insurance agent, and I knew right away why he was here. "Uncle Errol," he began after dinner as we sat in the living room, "Cade told me about your situation. I thought maybe you should reconsider your life insurance." I looked at Cade, who was studiously avoiding my gaze. "Why?" I asked bluntly. "I'm perfectly happy with the one I have. But there are new programs specifically for people with certain diagnoses." Pierce was visibly uncomfortable, but continued. "They provide better benefits and they cost more," I finished for him. "No, Pierce, thank you, but I'm not interested." "But, Uncle Errol," he cast a quick glance at Cade, "it's for your family, so that they'll be provided for after I'm dead?" I grinned. "Believe me, Cade will be quite well off as it is. Now let's change the subject." After that visit, I became more attentive to who Cade and Victoria brought into the house. Distant relatives I barely remembered showed up, old acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years. All of them, in one way or another, made small talk about my health, about how hard it would be to manage a big house when my condition worsened, about needing to think about the future. I realized it was manipulation. Cade and Victoria were trying to influence me through other people, hoping I would succumb to the pressure and agree to what they wanted, sell the house, move in with them or into a nursing home, give up control of my finances. But the most unpleasant discovery awaited me ahead. On Wednesday afternoon, I was driving back from the store and was pulling up to the house when I noticed Victoria's car in the driveway. It was strange. They usually only came over on the weekends, and they always gave me advance notice. I parked on the street and quietly approached the house. There were voices coming from the living room, Victoria and some other female voice I didn't recognize. The door was ajar, and I couldn't help but overhear their conversation. "The house is great, in a good neighborhood," the stranger said. "The price could go up 20% with a little renovation. Nyasha, we were thinking of selling it right after." "You know," that was Victoria. "Cade doesn't want to keep this house. Too many memories." "Of course I understand. The market's favorable for sellers right now. If you decide to put the house on the market, I can start the paperwork now." "That would be great. The sooner we get everything organized, the better." "Errol mustn't know anything. It would upset him." I stood frozen, unable to believe my ears. They were already planning the sale of my house. The house I still lived in. The house where my whole life with Miriam had been, where Cade had grown up. Anger built up inside me, hot and all-consuming. I pushed open the door and stepped into the living room. Victoria and a woman I didn't know, obviously a realtor, judging by the business suit and folder in her hands, turned around with looks of horror on their faces. "Errol!" Victoria jumped up, turning pale. "We weren't expecting you so early." "Obviously," my voice was icy. "Otherwise you wouldn't be discussing the sale of my house in my own living room." The realtor looked embarrassed. "I think I'll be going now." She quickly gathered her papers and practically ran out of the room. Victoria remained standing, nervously tugging at the hem of her blouse. "Errol, it's not what you think." "No?" I strode into the room and sat down, feeling my legs refuse to hold me up with anger. Because it seems to me that you discussed selling my house with a realtor while I was still alive. I just, Kate and I just wanted to be prepared, so we wouldn't have to do it in a hurry when, she hesitated. When I'm dead, I finished it for her. And you thought it would be better to organize everything behind my back? Ifrei, we didn't want to upset you, her voice trembled. Cade said it would be better if you didn't know about it, that it would only add to your stress. How thoughtful of you. I didn't try to hide the sarcasm. What else do you plan to do with my possessions while I'm still breathing? She lowered her eyes. Errol, please don't be like that. We're just trying to help. No, Victoria, I shook my head. You're trying to control my money, my house, my life. And you know what? I'm done. I want you to leave. Now. But now, I said firmly. And tell Cade I want to talk to him. In person, not over the phone. Victoria silently gathered her things and walked out. I heard her car start, the gravel crunching under her wheels as she drove away. I was left sitting in the living room, stunned by the betrayal. They weren't just discussing selling the house. They were actively preparing for it, behind my back, while they continued to feign care and consideration. I now knew for sure that their sudden concern was nothing more than a facade. They just wanted to make sure they would get everything when I was gone, and maybe even sooner, if they could convince me to relinquish control of my affairs. I went to the window and took a long look at my garden, at the house where most of my life had been spent. I wasn't going to let them control all of it. Not now, not while I was still alive, and probably not even after I was dead. Cade arrived the next day around noon. I watched through the window as he nervously parked his car, as he sat for several minutes, hesitant to get out. Finally, he pulled himself together and headed for the door. I didn't wait for the bell to ring, and opened it myself before he could press the button. Daddy, he started at once. I need to explain. Come in, I said calmly. We really need to talk. He made his way into the house, avoiding looking me in the eye. I pointed to a chair in the living room and sat down across from him. We were silent for a while. Victoria told me what happened, Cade said finally. I understand that you're upset. Upset? I shook my head. No, Cade, I'm not upset. I'm disappointed and angry. But most of all, I'm just sad. He looked up at me, and I could see the confusion in his eyes. Sad? Yes. Sad that my own son, my only child, can't wait for me to die so he can sell off everything I hold dear. That's not true, he jumped up. I just wanted to be prepared, to have everything organized. You know how I don't like uncertainty. No, Cade, you didn't want to be prepared. You wanted to make sure nothing slipped through your fingers. Not the house, not the car, not the savings. You were afraid I might change the will or spend every last dime. He was silent, and his silence was more eloquent than any words. And you know what? I continued. You were right. I really am going to change my will. I called my lawyer this morning. He's coming over tomorrow to draw up all the necessary paperwork. Cade turned pale. What do you mean by that? I'm not leaving you all my assets anymore, I said bluntly. Not after I found out you were planning to sell my house without even waiting for my funeral. But then to whom? His voice trembled. It's not like you have anyone else. It was painful to hear, but true. I really had almost no one. Friends had gradually passed away. Relatives had long since lost touch. But still there was one person who always stayed by my side. You're wrong, I replied. I have Henry Thornburg. Thornburg? Your old colleague? Cade looked stunned. But you two just worked together. We didn't just work together. Henry was my friend for 40 years. He was there for me when your mother was sick. He visits me every week, even though he can barely move himself because of arthritis. He calls me just to see how I'm doing, not to see if I've spent money he thinks is his. Cade jumped up from his chair. That's not fair. I am your son, your flesh and blood. Yes, you are my son, I agreed. And that's why it pains me so much to see what you've become. A calculating, cold man who thinks only of material possessions. That's not true, he was almost shouting. I care about you. You care about what you can get from me, I corrected him. The house, the money, the car. But not me. Cade sank back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. What are you going to do? he asked in a muffled voice. Miriam, I'm going to rewrite the will. The house and half the savings will go to Henry. He never asked for anything like that, but I know he'll take care of my house. Maybe even live here. His own house is too big for him alone after his wife dies. And the other half, there was a note of hope in his voice. I'll spend the rest. Travel, entertainment, charity if I want to. Anything that will bring me joy in the remaining months. You can't do this to me. Cade shook his head. I'm your only son. We may have had our differences, but disagreements? I grinned bitterly. Cade, you plan to sell my house behind my back. You brought your relatives and acquaintances into my house to pressure me. You tried to control my every move, my every decision. That's not disagreement. That's manipulation and betrayal. He was silent, unable to find the words to object. And you know what the saddest part is? I continued. If you just loved me, if you just cared about me without ulterior motives, I would gladly leave you everything. Because you're my son, and I love you no matter what. A heavy silence hung in the room. I looked at Cade and saw in him the boy I had once taught to ride a bike, the boy I had comforted after his first failure, the boy I had made proud at his high school graduation. Somewhere along the way we had lost touch, and now it seemed too late to regain it. I'm asking you to leave, I said finally, and don't come back. Not you, not Victoria. I want to spend the rest of my time in peace. Dad, his voice trembled. Please don't do this. Let's talk. Let's find a compromise. No, Cade, it's too late to talk. The decision has been made. He stood up, a whole range of emotions on his face. Anger, fear, despair. You'll regret this, he said coldly. When you get worse, when you can't take care of yourself, you're going to need a family. I have Henry, I replied calmly. Imwayne, and health insurance that covers hospice care. I'll be fine. Cade stood there for a moment as if about to say something, but then he turned and walked away. I heard the front door slam, the engine of his car start, and then there was silence. I sat back in my chair, feeling strangely calm. The decision I'd made was painful, but the right one. I'd let Cade manipulate me for too long, turned a blind eye to his selfishness and calculating nature for too long. It was time to put an end to that. The lawyer, Mr. Lewis, arrived the next day as promised. He was not old, but retained a clear mind and a professional attitude. We had known each other for many years. He had drafted my previous will while Miriam was still alive. Are you sure you want to make these changes? Ani, he asked when I explained what I wanted to do. Absolutely, I replied. Henry has been my best friend all my life. He deserves this more than anyone. Mr. Lewis nodded and began to draw up the paperwork. 2 hours later, the new will was ready. According to it, the house and half of my savings went to Henry Thornburg. The remainder was left to me to spend as I pleased. After the lawyer left, I called Henry. He was surprised and touched by my decision, though he tried to refuse. Errol, this is too generous, he said. I cannot accept such a gift. You are my oldest friend, Henry, I replied. You've been there for me when I needed you. You deserve it, and I know you'll take care of the house that means so much to me. After much discussion, he agreed, albeit with some reservations. I'll consider this a temporary solution, he said. If you change your mind, or if Cade— I won't change my mind, I interrupted him. And Cade won't change either. He's too much like me when I was younger, stubborn and focused on material possessions. Only unlike me, he never realized what was really important in life. After talking to Henry, I sat down at my computer and started planning a trip. Not just a short trip like the one to the Ozarks, but a real long trip. On the route Miriam and I had always dreamed of, but had never taken. From the East Coast to the West Coast, through all the splendor of the American landscape. I booked hotels, made a list of sites I wanted to visit. The Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, Yosemite, the Pacific coast of California. Places I'd only seen in pictures, but had always dreamed of seeing with my own eyes. In the evening, Cade called. His voice was cold, businesslike. I spoke to Mr. Lewis, he said without preamble. He confirmed that you had changed your will. Yes, I answered calmly. I told you I'd do it. Hanenam. I'll contest it, he said, his voice threatening. After you're dead, on grounds of incapacity or undue influence. You can try, I agreed. But Mr. Lewis was very thorough. including a report on my sanity from 2 independent psychiatrists. You're going to lose, Cade, and you're going to spend a lot of money on legal fees. There was a long pause in the phone. Why are you doing this? He finally asked, and for the first time I heard something resembling pain in his voice. I'm your son. Yes, you are my son, I agreed, and that's why it pains me so much to see what you've become. A man who values money and possessions more than relationships and love. That's not true, he countered, but without the same confidence. Then prove it, I suggested. Not with money or ostentatious care, but with real feelings and respect. How? Start by accepting my decision. It's my choice, Cade. My life and my death. My right to use what I have as I see fit. He was silent for a long time, and I thought he'd hung up on me. All right, he said quietly at last. I accept your decision, but I'd still like to see you. You're my father, and I still love you. I closed my eyes, feeling a lump in my throat. And I love you, Cade. I always have, and I always will. But right now I need time and space to live the rest of my days the way I want to. I understand. His voice sounded broken. Just, call me when you're ready to talk. I promised I would, though I wasn't sure I would. Too much had been said. Too much could no longer be undone. I spent the next few days preparing for the trip. I packed, checked my car, mapped out a detailed itinerary. I planned to be on the road for at least a month, maybe longer if my health permitted. Henry came by every day to help with the preparations, though he was concerned about my condition. Are you sure you can handle such a long trip? He asked. Wouldn't it be better to fly and rent a car locally? Shuthinam. No, I answered firmly. I want to drive around the country in my car. See everything there is to see along the way. That was our dream with Miriam. He nodded understandingly and didn't argue anymore. The night before we left, I composed a letter for Cade and Victoria. Not an electronic one, but a real one, on paper. I thought long and hard about each word, wanting it to be sincere, but not cruel. Dear Cade and Victoria, I wrote, by the time you receive this letter, I will be far away. I am embarking on the journey your mother and I have always dreamed of, from the East Coast to the West Coast, through all the beauty of our country. I don't know how long I'll live, maybe a few months, maybe less, but I want to spend that time savoring every day, every moment, without regrets, without resentment, without bitterness. I am enclosing a few photos, places I have already visited and places I still plan to visit. I also enclose a copy of my latest bank statement. As you can see, I'm not going to spend every dime I have. Some of my savings will be left to Henry, just as I had planned. I want you to know that despite our differences, I love you. You're my son, Cade, and nothing will change that. But love doesn't mean blindly accepting everything you do, and it's not measured in money or possessions. I hope someday you will realize that the real value in life is not what you have accumulated, but how you lived, who you loved, and who loved you back. Be happy and take care of each other. Love, your father. I sealed the letter in an envelope along with photos and a bank statement that showed a substantial, but not total, decrease in my savings. I asked Henry to mail the letter a week after I left. The morning of the day of my departure was clear and cool. I woke up at first light, feeling strangely excited, almost like a child before a long-awaited field trip. I gathered the last of my things, checked to make sure all my papers were in place, and locked up the house. Henry came to see me off. He stood by his old car, leaning on his cane, his face a mixture of concern and understanding. Take care of yourself, old boy, he said, hugging me tightly, and call me every day. I want to know you're okay. I promise. I patted him on the back. And thank you for everything. Iniro, there's nothing to thank you for. He waved me off. Just come back when you're ready. The house will be waiting for you. I nodded, even though we both knew I probably wouldn't be coming back, at least not alive. Getting behind the wheel of my Aston Martin, I looked back at the house one last time. The white walls, the green shutters, the rose bushes that Miriam loved so much. So many memories, so much life. I started the engine, and the car gave a soft growl. The sun played on the silver surface of the hood, creating an almost mystical glow. As I pulled onto the road, I didn't look back. There was freedom ahead, new impressions, a new chapter of my life, perhaps the last, but no less valuable. As I drove through downtown Salam Springs, I noticed a familiar figure on the sidewalk. Cade was standing by his car, clearly waiting for me. I slowed for a moment, but didn't stop. Our gazes met, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time, a genuine sadness and maybe understanding. He raised his hand in a parting gesture, and I returned the favor. Not stopping, not turning back, continuing forward, toward the horizon, toward new roads and new experiences. Once on the highway, I turned on the radio. An old song came on that Miriam and I used to love when we were young. I smiled, imagining that she was sitting next to me, that we were finally taking the trip we had always dreamed of. The road ahead stretched out, endless and full of possibilities. And even though I knew my time was limited, I felt freer and more alive in that moment than ever before.